Hello everyone, this is the Mind of Lilith, and thank you for joining me today. I hope you're all doing well. I wanted to quickly share my thoughts and opinions about the manufactured migrant crisis at the southern border in the United States. A few months ago, I talked about this topic, and I said that one of the reasons why I believe that this was happening was because the U.S. government and the military has been colluding with these South American countries to have the poor and disenfranchised citizenry self-deport, so that the U.S. military and corporations can have access to the mineral-rich land that the Latin Americans are living on. The U.S. military admitted that South America is replete with natural resources that they wanted to have access to before the Russians and Chinese got to it. So I believe that the U.S. military wants the mineral rights to these lands and even the land itself for corporations to build their little resorts like they're doing in the Caribbean and in Hawaii. But I believe that the U.S. military has made a deal with these Latin American governments to have the people that are poor, can't find a job, they'll have them self-deport so that the military wouldn't have to go into these lands and forcefully remove the people from their property so that they can get access to the natural resources. So I believe that the U.S. military went to these Latin American leaders and said, listen, you have resources and minerals that we want and that we need to further our technological advancement, which we need for our military. Our military superiority is based on having weapons technologies that are more advanced than other countries. So we need to have access to these resources for our economy and for our military. And instead of us coming in and invading and bombing you out of power, right, we will give you the opportunity to deport the people that you don't want to the United States, and we'll give them room and board and shelter and a job in exchange for access to these lands that we want. That was reason number one that I believe that this U.S. migrant crisis is manufactured, and you guys can listen to that commentary after you finish listening to this one. So I became suspicious of this whole debacle when the governor of Texas started to transport these migrants into these major cities, these major economic hubs, and they're not transporting these people to Idaho or to Wyoming or Montana. They're bringing them into major cities to plug them into the economy immediately. We're going to give them jobs, we're going to give them food, clothing, shelter, so on and so forth. And I became suspicious because in my mind, I'm like, okay, if you don't want these people here, why make it harder for them to self-deport? New York City is much further from Mexico or from Venezuela than Texas is. So you're making it harder for these people to leave if you don't want them here. So why are you transporting these people into major cities like Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, where they can become a part of the economy immediately if you don't want them to be here? And then something dawned on me. Last year, there was this whole debate about Roe versus Wade and pro-life versus pro-choice. And I suspected that this issue became more important because millennials and Gen X are not having enough children to replace the population. So when the boomers retire, Gen X and millennials will be contributing to their pension and Social Security and Medicare. But when millennials and Gen X retire, there's not going to be enough people to pay our pension and Social Security and Medicare and other stuff that we need as as senior citizens. And so I suspected that there was a debate in the government of whether or not we should make it more difficult for women to delete their children, or should we just import new workers that don't need to go to school, they don't need to get an education, they can just come in as strong, able-bodied adults ready to work, right? And so that's basically free labor for the country, because these migrants did not go to public schools. They did not, utilize any of the public facilities that the taxpayers are paying for. So these people are coming in like free labor. And that's why New York City, they're so gung-ho about giving these people housing and jobs and so on and so forth, because they believe that these people will be an asset to the economy. And I decided to do some more research. And I was like, how many boomers are there in the United States? or what percentage of the federal income tax is being paid by baby boomers, right? And I found an old article from the New York Times. And this article was published on April 11th, 2013. And the title of the article is, Why Am I Paying All These Taxes? So I want to read the article and then I'll add my commentary. The article starts off with, baby boomers stand tall. This is our moment. Oh, sure, plenty of silent generation members. Silent generation is before 1935. Gen Xers is 1970 to like 1983. Millennials is like 1983 to 1996, and maybe even a precocious Gen Zer, which is like 1996 to 2008. Or two on the summary from the beginning. Oh, sure, plenty of silent generation members, Gen Xers, millennials, and maybe even a precocious Gen Zer or two on the Yahoo payroll will be heading to post offices next week to file their taxes, but none can lay claim to the boomers' supreme act of selflessness. Boomers are from 1935, 36, 37 to 1958, 1960. 20 years about, okay? The article continues. We pay more in income taxes than any other generation. Again, we pay more, the boomers pay more in income taxes than any other generation. Accustomed as we are to brickbats being thrown at boomers, we will now pause so you non-boomers can post thank you notes in the comment section. Admittedly, the research group that broke down tax payments by age, the Tax Foundation, failed to ascribe any noble motives to us. Scott Hodge, the president of the group, left an impression that mere demographics, meaning the quantity, the numbers of boomers alive, not the inherent goodness of baby boomers, was the explanation for the disproportionate tax load. What this means is the pig is moving through the python, if you will. So there are more boomers alive, as far as numbers, sheer numbers, than millennials and Gen X and Gen Z. So millennials is the second largest population, demographic population, but we're not having any children. So the article continues. What this means is the pig is moving through the python, if you will. He said, the pig, that will be us. In a report released last year, the Tax Foundation said that taxpayers over 45 now pay 70% of all income taxes. Now remember, this article was written in 2013. Okay? In a report released last year, the Tax Foundation said that taxpayers over 45 now pay 70% of all income taxes, compared with 60% in 1997. For baby boomers, Mr. Hodge estimated the number is about 50%. So this one group of people, the boomers, are paying 50% of income taxes as of 2013. It's not just that there's so many boomers, the quantity, right? David J. Coder, managing director of Kogut Tax Center at American University, notes that as people get older, they tend to earn more, which is likely to give them a bigger tax bill. The Tax Foundation report said that the highest average income in 2010, $79,787, was found for people ages 55 to 65. The figure was $40,980 for people ages 26 to 35. You might think this would help explain why so many younger people have the thing about baby boomers, but it probably has more to do with the fact that as boomers retire, as boomers retire and throw themselves onto the mercy of the Social Security and Medicare systems, younger earners will find themselves on the bottom of a giant inverted pyramid. The math just doesn't work. And boomers who try to gain sympathy by pointing to their generation's big tax bill are unlikely to gain much ground, even if they're under pressure of their own. Naturally, the report said, this raises concerns over the ability of this older generation to save for both their own retirement while financing the lion's share of the cost of government. So, by 2030, about 75 million boomers will retire. Okay? By 2030, within 7 years, 5 to 7 years, 75 million boomers will retire. So that means that all of that federal income tax will be taken out of the system. That's number one. Number two, these boomers are going to be relying on Social Security, pensions from government jobs, and also Medicare and other, and other social safety net programs. Sometimes food stamps or whatever. So not only are they taking money out of the economy, they're also going to be spending money that they have paid into the economy. So it's a double loss for the government. So we're in a crisis at this point, and the government can't say that. They can't be honest with us, because we'll ask, what happened to the fucking money? What happened to all the money these people have been paying for 50, 60 years? The government will have to say, well, we spent it on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've spent trillions of dollars on wars that went nowhere, okay? Before 9/11 happened, Donald Rumsfeld said that the Pentagon could not account for $2 trillion that were missing. $2 trillion were missing from the government. That was unaccounted for. Trillion. In 2001, okay? Right before 9/11. All of a sudden, this thing happens. This massive terrorist attack. I'll talk about that later. This massive orchestrated terrorist attack that happened. And then we went to war for 20 years and spent another $1 trillion trying to basically take Iraq's oil so we could basically fund the military industrial complex. We also went to Afghanistan and grew heroin, okay, to fund the illegal wars that we were waging around the world. So the federal government has been misappropriating the tax revenue that they've been receiving from the boomers, which is why they can't be honest with us about what's going on, because we're going to ask for an audit. What's going on with these books? Where's this money going? And so now what they're doing is they're going to import millions, not 100,000. I think they're going to try to import 20, 30, 40 million people into the country to replace the boomers and also the millennials who aren't having any children. Okay. I mentioned earlier that millennials are not replacing the population. We're having one or fewer children. I think the population is at 1.4%. We need to be at least 2.1 to replace the population. We're not having any children, and we're not having any children because we're broke. A lot of us are depressed. A lot of us have mental health issues. A lot of us are addicted to the opium that the U.S. government imported into this country. Okay. A lot of us are addicted to drugs. So now you're seeing all of these state governments, they're legalizing marijuana and other drugs because they need that revenue. They need that drug money revenue, right? Because drugs was bad before, but drugs are no longer bad because the U.S. government needs that money. They need the tax revenue from the marijuana, from other BS they're putting out there now, right? They want to keep you high and they want to keep you dumb, deaf, and blind. So they're going to tax this drug money while not admitting that they've basically squandered trillions of dollars of tax revenue that they've received from boomers over the past 40, 50 years. And so now what's going to end up happening is that they're going to bring in able-bodied men and women. They're going to bring in Hispanic women because Hispanic women are very fertile. They're Catholic. They don't believe in abortion. They're going to bring in women who have traditional family values, who want to have children in spite of how difficult it is. They're going to bring in these children to help improve the population numbers. And they're also bringing in able-bodied men who can go right to work and start paying taxes. The U.S. government said they're going to give work visas to 400,000 Venezuelans immediately. They need this money now. The government is desperate. They don't have a choice. The Ponzi scheme is about to collapse. They need to bring these migrants in to pay taxes that the boomers are about to take out of the economy. The boomers are going to be too old or too sick or whatever. They're going to retire. On top of that, boomers have assets. So they own the most property out of any demographic. Don't you guys think it's weird that the government is saying that there is a housing shortage? There's a housing shortage, but they're bringing in a bunch of migrants. Which one is it? If there was a housing shortage, then you would have no room or no space to house all these migrant people. The housing shortage is also manufactured because a lot of people, boomers specifically, and these corporations purchase single family homes so that people will become renters. So now you can have two families renting one home. You can have people paying $700 to live inside of a small box. So you can now squeeze the middle class millennials and Gen X for every little dime, right? You're going to force these millennials and Gen Zers and Gen X into these tiny homes because we have more millionaires and billionaires than ever. And the more millionaires and billionaires we have in the world, the less land there is for the rest of us. Because most of these millionaires and billionaires believe in buying thousands of acres of property. And so if they own thousands of acres of property in prime real estate areas, like in places in Florida and in Hawaii and in South America and in, whatever other places in the world, the Caribbean, that have beautiful climate, beautiful weather, beautiful landscapes and nature. If you have this capitalistic dynamic where there are millions of millionaires now, if there are millions of millionaires, those millions of millionaires want millions of acres of land among themselves. So the poor, the middle class, we are in their way. And what they're doing is they're catastrophizing everything. They're talking about climate change, destroying coastal cities and prime real estate areas. I mean, we had this little BS rainstorm in New York City a couple of days ago, and the streets were flooded. And the streets weren't flooded because of climate change. They were flooded because we have built buildings on just about every empty lot in Brooklyn and in New York. Like, we used to have lots of empty lots in certain parts of New York. And those empty lots were like grass fields. And those grass fields would absorb a lot of the rainwater. So when you pave over grass and soil, you're going to have more floods. That's common sense. But the powers that be in the U.S. government, what they're doing is they're trying to blame the poor and the middle class for the climate crisis, when in actuality, the reason why we're constructing so many properties is because a lot of wealthy individuals own a disproportionate amount of land and property. So, for example, in New York, if you had a wealthy person buy a brownstone, that brownstone used to house maybe 4 or 5 families. But you have celebrities buying 2 and 3 brownstones on one block, and then they convert those 3 brownstones into one home. You're now displacing 15, 16, maybe even 20 families for one celebrity. This has been happening all over the world, right? So the climate crisis is being caused by the wealthy, okay? The lack of housing is being caused by the super wealthy. Not super wealthy, millionaires and billionaires. The Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Oprah Winfreys of the world, even the basic millionaires who, again, own hundreds of acres of land in multiple cities on multiple continents for one family. So now we're in the way. Now you guys got to live in tiny homes so that we can own thousands of acres of land for our one family, or for our, extended family, for maybe 200 people for this one family. So now thousands of you or millions of you are going to have to live in little pods, like in the Matrix, live in little pods so that we can have basically control the whole fucking planet and turn it into our personal playground. All right, back to the migration issue. I'm going to read another New York Times article expounding on this issue a little bit more. This article is titled, "Soon We Won't Have Enough Kids to Fill Our Schools. That's a Problem." And this article was written on June 14th, 2023, almost 10 years to the day that the previous articles that I read was written, okay? The article was written by Jessica Gross, and the article starts off by saying, "The number of school-age children in America is declining. At least one reason is the falling birth rate after the Great Recession, and declining university enrollment based on a lower school-age population, which has been described as a demographic cliff, is something else that some colleges are already grappling with. The K-12 public school systems around the country are facing a similar demographic reality. Declining enrollment hits cities like Chicago, right, where many migrants are being bused. Declining enrollment hit cities like Chicago and states like Michigan before COVID, and the pandemic hit many other school systems, Philadelphia, New York City, Seattle, and several districts in the Boston suburbs, like a wrecking ball. This is a crisis, okay? As the Times' Sean Hubler reported in May, altogether, America's public schools have lost at least 1.2 million students since 2020, according to a survey from the right-leaning American Enterprise Institute. And the discussion around the more recent downtrend may have obscured demographic changes that were developing before the pandemic, according to analysis by Thomas D., a professor at Stanford's Graduate School of Education. The population of school-aged children in the U.S., those 5 to 17 years old, actually fell by over 250,000 during the pandemic, suggesting that some of the enrollment loss during the pandemic simply reflects declining birth and immigration rates rather than an active choice not to attend public schools. After all, today's school-age children were born before 2020. While the school district in Florida's Orange County, home to Orlando, is expanding, the trends aren't uniform throughout the state. Pinellas County in the Tampa Bay area saw an enrollment decline approaching 5% from 2020 to 2022. Even in states like Arizona, where there's been an overall population growth in recent years, enrollment has remained below pre-pandemic numbers, and rural schools in the state have been struggling for several years. So if there's been an overall population growth, that means adults are moving to these states. Adults are moving around, right? Grown people with no kids who have disposable income maybe, or who are looking for cheaper cost of living, they're moving around with no kids. So in some places like wealthier suburbs that have long been seen as desirable public school destinations for families, they're not immune either. The Tony Grosse Pointe, Michigan has seen significant enrollment declines since 2010. If declining enrollment is a reality for many of this country's K-12 public schools, what might the future look like? And how should states and local districts prepare? Okay? Right now, there aren't a lot of great answers to those questions. I talked to Brian Alexander, the author of Academia Next, The Futures of Higher Education, who said that we'll likely see efforts in various jurisdictions to reduce overhead, which often looks like closing and consolidating schools, even districts, which happened a lot in Chicago. With the caveat that because of local control, different states, counties, and municipalities are run differently. Alexander pointed to Vermont as a harbinger of what's to come. In 2015, Vermont passed Act 46, which Vermont Public Radio reported is designed to make public education more equitable and sustainable in the face of declining enrollment by consolidating school administration. The first phase of the law's implementation allowed districts to voluntarily consolidate and offered incentives to do so, like merger support grants and the potential of a temporary homestead property tax reduction. But it later allowed the State Board of Education to order involuntary mergers, the Burlington Free Press explained. Heather Boucher, Vermont's interim education secretary, told me that the goal was to create economies of scale for districts that were losing both their tax bases, boomers, and also millennials moving to cheaper places, and their school-age population. So not only are boomers retiring, there are not enough babies being born to replace them. Not in the school districts and not in the workspaces either. When enrollment declines too drastically without consolidation, she said the services available to those students who are at the school, the extracurricular activities that are available get cut. So this equity and inclusion push that's been propagated by the education system is not about being fair and, wanting to end racism and wanting to have a fair, equal society. It's not about that. It's about the fact that the numbers around the country are declining. So we need to consolidate the population of Black and brown and white kids into districts so that we don't lose our money. It's not about being humanitarian, being moral. They are pushing equity and inclusion in these school districts because they need to keep the numbers up. They need to keep the population of students enrolled up. And you can only do that if you merge districts. So if Manhattan districts, if there's a wealthy district in Manhattan that has a 5% decrease in population, in student population, you're going to have to allow Black and brown students who are not in that zone to attend those schools to bolster those numbers so that you don't have to cut staff. It's not about wanting to end racism. It's not about that. It's making sure that we don't have to cut too much of the budget because we're losing too many students. We're not replacing the population of students in the schools. So that's why this is BS. At the same time, said Ted Fisher, the Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs for the Vermont Agency of Education, while there are parts of the state with too many school buildings that are expensive to maintain, he knows there's tension for individual towns and villages. It's really hard to tell a community that's racist. I'm adding that part. It's really hard to tell a community you might be better off if you and your neighbors in another small town operated one school. And usually the small town will be poor Black and brown kids, BIPOC kids. So in order for you to keep your staff, white people, right, in order for you not to cut your budget, you have to enroll these poor Black kids into your schools to save your asses. Not for them, it's for you. to save your pension and to save your staff. Okay? So you don't have to fire anybody. That tension has played out in a variety of ways since Act 46 was passed. For example, in 2021, 2 towns in Addison County, Lincoln and Ripton, voted to withdraw from consolidated school districts. The story is a bit wonky and complicated. But as the Vermont public reporters Anna Van Deen and Abigail Giles put it, it ultimately boils down to small towns wanting to keep control of their local schools, no matter how tiny, because having a local school gives people a reason to be a community and not just a town. Chicago, which closed a bunch of public schools a decade ago, 10 years ago, when that initial report was written that I just read to you about the boomers paying most of the taxes. Okay. Chicago, which closed a bunch of public schools a decade ago with a rationale that they were underperforming and under-enrolled because a lot of Black people are having abortions. They're not having kids. Okay. Millions of abortions since 1975 in the Black community. We're not getting married. 40% of Black people don't have any children. So this is what happens. Chicago, which closed a bunch of public schools a decade ago with the rationale that they were underperforming and under-enrolled, is dealing with some of the same issues as Vermont, but in a very different context. WBEZ and the Chicago Sun-Times recently published a pretty devastating analysis of the impact of the closure of those schools, assessing that when officials closed them, they made 3 core promises. Students will be better off after the schools were closed, their new schools will be transformed, and former school buildings will be reborn as community assets. Instead, WBEZ and the Sun-Times reporting found that these promises largely have never been realized, and city and school leaders haven't tracked the outcomes because they did not care. Okay, I'm saying they didn't care. In essence, the majority of Black neighborhoods where these schools were closed had lost more population between 2013 and 2018. Remember when all these shootings were happening, the mass shootings, when the cartels were taking over Chicago and Black people were leaving as a result of that? The majority of Black neighborhoods where these schools were closed. And this is where this is Obama's stomping ground, right? Obama was the senator for Chicago, and he allowed this to happen. Where these schools were closed had lost more population between 2013 and 2018 than majority of Black neighborhoods that did not close schools, a 9.2% versus 3.2% decline. The cost savings of closing schools turned out not to be at all it was cracked up to be, and the schools that remained open and absorbed the children from the closed schools that were supposed to be better supported got a short-term resource infusion but are now just like any other school in Chicago at the mercy of enrollment swings and budget constraints. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to post a link to the article in the description box. You guys can take a look at that when you feel like it. So all in all, what I am saying is this. The U.S. government does not care about you having children as long as they can replace you with able-bodied grown men and women from other countries. Right? These are men and women that don't go to public schools, that don't use many public resources. They're pretty much full grown already. So you don't have to invest in the slave before they can work for you. So what's happening is that, this country, because it doesn't care about children and families, they don't care about you having children, because when people don't have children, they require less land and resources. All you're here to do is pay taxes and be used as a battery before you die. So, raising children is very expensive. And sometimes people need to use social services and public resources to help raise their children, whether it's childcare or public hospitals or WIC programs or SNAP programs or whatever. They need to use, social services and social safety nets to take care of their children. Some people do. And it's very convenient for the government to just import workers that are ready to work without having to worry about raising these people first. This is what happened during slavery in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, the slaves were worked so hard that many of them could not have children. And so they worked themselves to death at a young age, right? Working 15, 16 hours a day with little to no breaks. And they were used as batteries to make money for the wealthy elites of Europe. And so, the wealthy elites of Europe did not care about these slaves in the Caribbean having children, because children, they require care and nurturing, and they take time away from you doing your work. So if you don't have any kids, you'll spend your whole life working. And in some cases, you'll fill the void of not having children by buying more stuff, right? So you have more disposable income to spend on yourself, on clothes, hair, car, jewelries, eating out with your friends, enjoying your social life at the expense of having a family, which is very convenient for the government because all they have to do is just replace you with people from India and Africa and Latin America who are strong, who are healthy, who are young, who are full grown, and they're hungry. They're hungry for the opportunity to work here and send money back home to their families where they have children, right? So they don't mind migrants coming here. They don't mind a whole bunch of men coming here and, seeding up these single women out here who don't have a man, which is what's going to happen. A lot of these migrant men are going to get American women pregnant because a lot of American women are single. Okay. But anyway, these grown men are coming into this country ready to work. Let's give them a visa. They can start working within 6 months and start contributing to the tax revenue immediately because we don't have 20 years to fix this. We don't have 16 years to fix this. We barely have 5 years to fix this. Barely. This migrant crisis is going to continue for the foreseeable future until the government is satisfied that they have enough of a population to replace the boomers who are retiring in about 5 years. 75 million are retiring. So this 20 million that come into the country for the past 10 years, that's a drop in the bucket according to the government. And all of them are in on it. The Republicans and Democrats are in on it. All of them. Because none of them want to admit that they stole your money. And they use your money to fund illegal wars. They use your money to train terrorists. They use your money to grow drugs in different countries to get your people hooked on heroin and opium and fentanyl. They don't have an issue with the drug problem. They need the drugs to be here for a couple reasons. Number one, the American people are choosing to take drugs. So they'll be too dumb, deaf, blind, or high, or distracted to notice what's going on. That's good for the government. If you're inebriated, if you're always high, you're always intoxicated, you can't fight back against what's going on. You're weak to them. Like you can't do anything for yourself. You're a slave to your addiction. So in many instances, unfortunately, these people commit suicide by overdosing. So it's like the U.S. government doesn't care about that because all you are was a battery for them anyway. So if you're going to get rid of yourself and they don't have to do it for you, more power to you. Why would they stop you from hurting yourself? It benefits them either way because they can just replace you with a hungry, able-bodied, strong-willed immigrant who wants to work for $15 an hour, who doesn't mind living in a pod in New York or living in a pod in San Francisco because he's sending most of his money back home to his family with his wife and his children. Because in the country that he comes from, family is important. But here it's not. It's never been important in America. I mean, during slavery, women had their children taken away from them. Families were intentionally destroyed because it was profitable to do so, right? When you have a strong family, you have a culture, you have tradition, you have values, and you are impervious to the agenda of the elites. So they need to destroy your family and make you become a permanent consumer. You're married to your job. You're married to your social status. You're married to your career. Many of us care more about our jobs than our children. We care more about our ability to make money or to buy things for ourselves than having children in the family. This is all races in America. It's not just Black people doing this. Black people are doing this though. Like we're not having kids anymore. And we're like, yeah, that's good because that means that, we are making better decisions. We're becoming more economically self-sufficient. We have a better quality of life. We're not poor anymore. That's a good thing. But in the realm of politics and economics, if you have no children or if you have low numbers, then you have little to no power. We don't operate like the Black community doesn't operate like other wealthy, smaller populations that have tight-knit communities, but also high income. Our problem is that we don't have tight-knit communities. We have higher income, but no communities, no family to distribute that income within. So it's like we're individuals. We operate individually. We worry about our own needs, our own desires, our own wants, and we're not collectivists anymore. We bought into the idea of being individuals with individual aspirations and goals. And again, that's not a bad thing, but you cannot complain about losing political power if you don't control your own economy, if you don't control your own schools, if you're not getting married, you're not having any children, you're not a threat to the system. You're pretty much food and you're useless at this point. Like you can't complain about, we Black Americans can't complain about the migrant issue because, first of all, we voted for it. right? We voted for these policies because Donald Trump said build the wall, and many Black people said that's racist because many of us are immature and we don't think critically about politics. We think emotionally about politics. That's not how it works. So many of us decided to vote for someone who was pro-immigration. But this immigration thing is not, it's the U.S. government's desperate attempt to hold on to this Ponzi scheme. I don't think that this is being done intentionally to harm any specific group of people. I think the government is desperate as hell. They have no other choice. They're about to lose 50% of their federal income tax revenue, and these boomers are living longer. So you're paying for Social Security and Medicare for a longer period of time. They're living to 75, 80, 85 years old. So they're retiring at 65, some at 60, some at even 55 years old, right? And they're living 20 years off retirement. And during their retirement, Gen X is going to retire too. Gen X is going to start retiring in about 15 year while boomers are still alive and using the resources that they've put into the system. Medicare, Social Security, pension, whatever. So millennials are going to be paying for boomer and Gen X pension and Social Security entitlements, right? So we're in trouble. We don't have a choice but to have the migrants come into this country because we spent the last 40, 50 years fucking around and promoting anti-family, anti-community. Trillions of dollars have been lost by the Pentagon. Trillions of dollars. Why wasn't that paid towards the national debt? Where was that money going? Right? And again, we see how desperate the government is because now they're considering legalizing drugs and prostitution. Imagine a first world industrial country legalizing drugs and prostitution like we're in a third world country. When a government says you can legalize prostitution and drugs, it's over. That means that they don't have faith in an industrialized economy. I mean, we've outsourced 90% of our manufacturing to other countries over the past 50, 60 years. So the chickens are coming home to roost in multiple ways, in many, many different ways. A lot of these boomers have benefited from those policies, NAFTA or trade agreements that outsourced good paying union jobs. And once you start to outsource middle-class jobs, then you'll have less children because people don't like having children in economically precarious situations. So if I can't afford to have children, then I'm not going to have them. That's the mentality that many people have because it's very hard to have children in this country when you're poor. Childcare is very expensive. I've said this multiple times. In this country, the United States, a mother's job is not to be a mother. That's not her primary job. Her primary job is to work and to pay taxes, right? And to put her child in childcare or in public school. So your job is to have a baby and give that baby to the state to raise so that your earning potential could be increased so you could pay more taxes. And the boomers have done that, but the boomers have also, they were the last generation to have, I think, 2.5 children because they were born during an economic boom in this country. So they had more financial opportunities. I'm not saying it was all peachy keen. You know, we had a recession in the 70s that affected them. And even in the 80s, there was some stuff going on. But for the most part, boomers have had more economic security than other generations after them, especially millennials. Many millennials got screwed in multiple ways. Like 9/11 happened when I was 15 years old. So... And then 6 years later, when I was 21, the economy crashed and it took a decade to recover. So a lot of millennials lost ground. They could not purchase homes. They couldn't pay off debt. They couldn't, move forward in their careers. It was an L. And now the government is desperate because they effed up bad. They messed up real bad. And the house of cards is about to fall down. So they need these migrants to come in and replace the boomers that are retiring. It's not going to stop. So either get used to it or make yourself more competitive in the marketplace. Black Americans should be learning a second language. You should be learning Spanish, period. I don't know why this is not mandatory in New York City public schools. We do have ESL programs, but all children from K to 12 or from 3K to 12 should be learning Spanish at this point. Because as the Hispanic population increases, more and more jobs will require you to be bilingual. So Black Americans in particular are in an even more precarious position. So this is not going to stop. You can't pray it away. You're not going to vote it away because it's going to continue for at least another 3-4 years until they feel like we have enough migrants to replace the boomers. And there's also another option, which they've already exercised. And the other option is to cull the older population, to make them sick and die earlier than they normally would. So instead of dying at 85, you'll die at 75 or 70. And so they've already started doing that, and you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I look forward to reading your feedback. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will speak to you soon.